I am Lily, living in the dazzling lights of Chicago, where my love with Ethan felt like a dream. But then my mother-in-law, Margaret, turned everything into a nightmare with an insulting message and a $3,500 bill she couldn't pay. What she didn't expect. That hotel belongs to my family. Hear the story of sweet revenge and the priceless lesson that changed everything. I'm writing this from our little apartment on the north side of Chicago, where the lights from the skyline spill through the window and scatter across our hardwood floor like broken stars. There's something strangely comforting about the hum of the city constant. Imperfect. Alive. It's been my home for almost 4 years now. But tonight, as I sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea in hand, I find myself thinking back to how it all began with a coffee, a laugh, and a man named Ethan. We met at a tiny coffee shop in Lincoln Park, tucked between a bookstore and a boutique that sold overpriced vintage scarves. It was one of those unassuming places with mismatched chairs and indie music floating through the air. I had gone in on a rainy afternoon to escape the downpour. He was already there, flipping through a medical journal. Of all things. I remember thinking he looked too kind to be real rumpled dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a shy smile that crept up on his face like it didn't ask for permission. We both reached for the same scone at the counter. He looked at me and said, "You go ahead. I'm just procrastinating anyway." I laughed, and something about that moment felt off script. Like maybe, just maybe, life had taken a detour I wasn't expecting. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours. He was a resident at Northwestern Memorial, exhausted but passionate. I was working in nonprofit strategy and had just moved out of my family's house in River Forest to make it on my own. We talked about medicine, about books, about how overpriced dog food had become. There was no pretense, no posturing, just two people who stumbled into the same shelter from the rain. Our love bloomed fast, like spring flowers in late March early, but full of promise. We had Sunday morning walks through the farmer's market, shared playlists, spontaneous road trips to Michigan. I felt seen with Ethan. He asked questions that made me think, listened like I mattered. He was gentle, funny, grounded. And for a long time, that was all that existed. Just us. Then came Margaret. I met his mother 6 months into our relationship. Ethan invited me to dinner at a sleek Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago, white tablecloths, chandeliers, waiters and bow ties. I wore a navy dress and curled my hair 3 times over, trying to tame the nerves crawling up my spine. Margaret arrived fashionably late, wearing a deep red Chanel blazer and an expression that could cut glass. She gave me a once-over, the kind where your value is calculated silently and efficiently. "So, you're Lily," she said, lips barely moving. "Yes, it's lovely to finally meet you. Mrs. Bennett," I offered with a smile, extending my hand. She took it, briefly, like it might contaminate her manicure. "Call me Margaret. Mrs. makes me feel old." Dinner began with small talk, Ethan doing most of the heavy lifting, trying to bridge the awkwardness. Margaret sipped her wine slowly, eyes scanning every word I spoke like she was waiting for me to slip. Then came the jab. "And what exactly do you do again, Lily?" she asked. "I work in nonprofit consulting," I replied, keeping my tone even, "mainly with education and youth development initiatives." "Oh," she said, drawing out the syllable like it tasted bitter. "So, not very lucrative." Then, Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I felt my chest tighten. "I do it because I believe in the work," I replied softly. She smiled tight. "Fake. Of course. And I'm sure Ethan believes in love too. Just hope he's not being too generous." I blinked, unsure I heard her correctly. "Excuse me." She took another sip of wine. "You're beautiful, and I'm sure you're very kind. But you do know how it looks, don't you? Young doctor from a good family falls for a pretty girl with ambition and no assets. It's very modern." Ethan dropped his fork. "Mom, it's all right." I cut in, my voice trembling but calm. "I think I understand." But I didn't. Not really. Not until that moment did I realize that some people didn't care how kind you were, or how deeply you loved their child. They saw status, power, prestige, and if you didn't fit their mold, you were just noise. That night, Ethan walked me home in silence. When we reached my apartment, he finally said, "I'm so sorry. She wasn't always like this." I nodded. "I believe you. She's proud. She raised me alone. Sacrificed a lot. I get it," I said, even though I didn't. Not fully. "I love you, Lily," he whispered, "and I don't care what she thinks. But I cared. I cared too much." Her words had sown seeds of doubt into places I thought were solid. Was I enough for him? Would I ever be still? I held onto the warmth of his hand in mine. I told myself that love was stronger than pride, that with time, she would see me for who I was, that maybe, just maybe, the light from our little apartment window would one day reach her heart too. I was wrong. But that was only the beginning. Our wedding wasn't the stuff of fairy tales, but it was ours. Just the two of us, standing in front of a judge in a quiet courthouse in downtown Chicago, fingers laced, eyes steady. I wore a simple ivory dress I found on sale at a vintage shop in Wicker Park. Ethan had on a navy suit that didn't quite fit at the shoulders, but he looked perfect to me. There were no flowers, no champagne toasts, no first dance. Just a promise, spoken softly, between two people who truly believed love was enough. And for a while, it was. We moved into a modest one-bedroom in Ravenswood. The kitchen tiles were cracked, the radiators groaned in the winter, and the shower head needed replacing. But it was home. We had Friday night takeout, shared mugs of coffee in the mornings, and long conversations about everything and nothing. I still remember how Ethan would look at me when he thought I wasn't watching, like I was the best decision he'd ever made. But money has a way of creeping into quiet places and turning the volume up on doubt. Ethan had always been generous, almost to a fault. And when Margaret called again with another urgent need, he never hesitated. 1 month it was a roof repair, the next, medical bills, then car trouble. Something about the way she phrased it always triggered his guilt. "I gave up everything for you," she'd say. "I don't ask for much." Soon, almost half of Ethan's paycheck was going straight to her bank account. At first, I tried to understand. She'd raised him alone, after all. But rent was tight. Groceries became a strategic exercise. I clipped coupons, picked up freelance work on the weekends. We skipped birthdays and date nights. Every time I opened our joint account, a slow ache settled in my chest. Then came the whispers. It started with a strange encounter at a friend's dinner party. A woman I barely knew leaned in and said with a sweet smile, "So, what's it like, going from nonprofit to marrying a doctor?" Her tone was innocent enough, but something in her eyes lingered curious, calculating. Then, a colleague of Ethan's at the hospital made a joke during brunch. "Well, I guess Ethan's the one with the sugar." Huh, I laughed it off, but I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. These weren't isolated moments, they were echoes of something deeper, a narrative being written behind my back. Later that week, Ethan pulled me aside at home. "I need to tell you something," he said, eyes heavy. Apparently, Margaret had told one of his aunts that I married him to escape a mediocre life. She said I had nothing to offer but a pretty face, and that I was bleeding him dry. The words made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but instead, I sat on our worn-out couch, staring at the faded rug, fingers tightening into fists. "She's poisoning people against me," I whispered. "I know," Ethan said, "and I hate it, but she's my mother. I don't know how to shut her out." I didn't say what I was thinking that he already knew how, but didn't want to pay the emotional cost. In truth, I could have ended the rumors with one sentence. One carefully placed fact that my family owned real estate across 2 states, that I had a trust fund untouched since college, that my father had offered to buy us a house outright the moment we got engaged. But I didn't. I didn't want anyone to think I was trying to prove myself with money. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be more than my last name. I wanted Ethan to love me for who I was, not for what I could offer. I wanted his world to see me as a partner, not a pawn in some warped social chess game. So I stayed quiet, and inside, the silence roared. Some nights, after he fell asleep, I would lie awake and imagine what it would be like if we had peace, if his mother wasn't always hovering like a storm cloud over our little life. I imagined holidays without tension, phone calls without guilt, and Sunday mornings without the nagging fear of another financial request. But one night, as the first snow began to fall in December, something shifted. I came home late from work, exhausted and cold. The apartment was dim, but warm. Ethan had made tea, and a candle flickered on the windowsill. He was sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over his lap, looking at his phone. When he saw me, he stood and crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Hey," he said softly, wrapping his arms around me. "You okay?" I nodded into his chest, but I wasn't. I was tired of being misunderstood, tired of feeling small in a story I didn't write, tired of pretending everything was fine. He held me tighter. "I know it's been hard," he murmured. "And I haven't always done the right thing. But I love you. I chose you. And I will keep choosing you every time." I pulled back to look at him, and something in his eyes, earnest, aching, broke the dam inside me. "I just want us," I whispered. "Without all the noise. We'll get there," he promised. That night, we sat by the window and watched the snow turn the city into something soft and new. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But even as we held each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was still there somewhere in the shadows waiting. And I was right. The moment Ethan walked through the door, I knew something was different. He had that spark in his eyes, the one that usually came with good news. "You'll never guess what just happened," he said, dropping his keys on the counter and pulling me into a half-dance, half-hug. I smiled cautiously. "Let me guess. You finally convinced your attending to let you take a weekend off." "Better," he said, kissing my cheek. "My mom's throwing a party at the Drake. She wants you to come." I blinked. The the Drake Hotel. He nodded eagerly. She said it's a charity benefit/birthday thing. She wants to introduce you to some people. Said it's time to start over. Something cold stirred in my stomach. Margaret, extending an olive branch. It didn't track, but Ethan looked so hopeful, so convinced that this was a turning point that I didn't have the heart to say what I was really thinking, that it felt like a setup, so I nodded. Sure, I'll go. In the following days, I tried to believe in the possibility of peace. I even bought a new dress, something elegant but understated, in soft emerald green. I told myself maybe this was the moment things would shift. Maybe Margaret had realized we were in this for the long haul and wanted to be part of it. But 2 nights before the event, as I was brushing my hair and humming along to a Fleetwood Mac song, my phone buzzed with a message that made the blood drain from my face. It was from Margaret. Lily, I think it's best if you sit this one out. The guest list is quite exclusive, meant for those of a certain standing. I wouldn't want you to feel out of place. I read it 3 times. My hands started shaking, not because I didn't understand what she meant, but because I understood it too well. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, the same reflection she had once called pretty but ordinary. My chest ached with humiliation and rage, but I didn't show Ethan the message. Not yet. I knew how much this party meant to him, how much he wanted to believe his mother was trying, and if I confronted her now, I'd be the villain. So I kept quiet, shoved the emerald dress to the back of the closet, and told Ethan the morning of the event that I had a migraine. He kissed my forehead with concern and left, dressed in his best suit, none the wiser. That evening, I couldn't help myself. I tracked the event on social media, people posting champagne flutes, string quartets, shimmering dresses under the Drake's chandeliers. But the real drama didn't unfold online. It happened at the hotel. As Ethan later recounted with a mix of confusion and embarrassment, Margaret arrived with 15 of her closest society friends. They took over a private room, ordered top-shelf wine, oysters, filet mignon, lobster tails without once glancing at the menu prices. They laughed loudly, clinked glasses like royalty, and treated the staff like invisible hands. When the bill arrived, $3,500 plus gratuity, Margaret's expression reportedly shifted from smug satisfaction to pure panic. She hadn't expected the final number, hadn't brought a working credit card. She tried to talk her way out of it, claimed the wine had been overpriced, that the service was too slow. She demanded a discount, then outright refused to pay. When the manager wouldn't budge, she insulted him to his face, called him a glorified waiter in a tux. It was Ethan's sweet, unprepared Ethan who ended up footing the bill using our shared emergency card. When he came home that night, he looked shell-shocked. Something was off, he muttered, pulling off his tie. She kept asking if you were really sick. And then, she caused this scene. It was embarrassing. I don't know what she's trying to prove. I stared at him for a long moment, debating whether to tell him the truth. But instead, I handed him my phone, open to Margaret's message. He read it slowly. His jaw clenched. You didn't tell me, he said quietly. I didn't want to ruin it for you, I replied. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. I'm so tired, Lily, of trying to believe she'll change. I sat beside him, not speaking, not yet, because inside me, something had begun to shift. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done being quiet, done being polite. I had played nice, waited for respect that never came, and swallowed insult after insult for the sake of peace. But Margaret had made it clear peace was never on the table, only power, and it was time I stopped playing her game and started playing mine. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was folding laundry, half listening to a true crime podcast, when I saw the name on the screen. Dad. We didn't talk often, his idea, not mine. He respected my choice to carve out a simpler, quieter life, but he always kept tabs from a distance, like a lighthouse keeping watch even if the ship didn't always signal back. Lily, he said, voice calm, but clipped. Was your mother-in-law at the Drake last weekend? I paused, sock in hand. Yes, I said slowly. Why? He sighed. One of my floor managers called. Apparently, she caused quite a scene, refused to pay a massive tab, berated the staff, tried to leverage someone else's name to get out of it, said her son was a doctor, and she was a guest of you. My stomach turned. I wasn't there. I said, she uninvited me, in writing. He was silent for a beat. She uninvited you from a party she hosted at my hotel. She doesn't know it's yours, I murmured. Another pause. I could practically hear the gears turning. Well, he said, that's interesting. I sat down on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone. Dad, there's something you should know. And I told him everything. The comments, the stares, the accusations that I was a gold digger, the people of a certain standing message, the $3,500 meltdown. All of it. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, very softly, he said, you've been very patient. Too patient, I replied. He exhaled slowly. the way he did when he was about to close a major deal. What do you want to do? It was the first time he'd ever asked me that. Not what should we do? Not what's the smart move, but what do you want? And just like that, something unlocked inside me. I want her to see the consequences of her behavior. I said, not through yelling or fighting. I want her to feel it. I want dignity, not drama. I assume that doesn't include calling the police. No, I said. I have a better idea. 2 days later, Margaret and her entourage returned to the Drake. Apparently, she'd been summoned under the impression that there was a billing issue to resolve. Her voice, I'm told, echoed down the marble hallway before she even reached the concierge. I don't understand why this couldn't be done over the phone, she snapped. I have Pilates at 2:30. She swept into the office in a cloud of perfume and indignation, her designer heels clicking like gunshots on the floor. And then she saw my father. He was sitting behind the desk, calm and perfectly polite, dressed in his usual navy suit and no-nonsense expression. Mrs. Bennet, he said, standing. I'm Michael Harrington, owner of the Drake. Margaret froze. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Oh, she said. I had no idea. Yes. He cut in smoothly. That's become very clear. He gestured to a printed invoice on the table. $3.578.40, plus a note from our kitchen staff regarding your remarks. She started to speak again, but he raised one hand. We don't tolerate abuse toward our employees, and unfortunately, we can't absorb this kind of loss, especially not from someone who falsely claimed to be connected to our family. Margaret blinked. I never. My daughter, he said coolly, is Lily Harrington, the same Lily you uninvited to your party, the same Lily who married your son. The color drained from her face. I wasn't there, but I wish I had been. You have 2 options. My father continued, still businesslike. You can pay the invoice in full, or you can join our kitchen staff for 4 hours of service cleaning dishes and sanitizing prep areas. We'll consider that acceptable restitution. You can't be serious, she said, voice cracking. Oh, he smiled. I assure you I am. The photos came later, sent by one of the amused sous chefs who recognized me from family dinners. There she was, Margaret Bennet, still in her designer dress, a hairnet on her perfectly coiffed head, sleeves rolled up and holding a sponge like it was dipped in acid. Her face was a mix of fury and disbelief. At one point, I was told, she dropped a plate and shrieked, I am not a peasant, to which one of the line cooks replied, You are now? Ethan didn't know what I'd done until days later, I told him gently. Over dinner. He stared at me in stunned silence. You arranged for my mother to scrub industrial pans at your dad's hotel. I shrugged, taking a sip of wine. I asked for accountability. He supplied the soap. He laughed a short, incredulous sound and leaned back in his chair. Honestly, she kind of had it coming. We didn't talk much more about it that night, but something in his posture changed. A quiet understanding passed between us. I had drawn a line, not in anger, but in quiet power. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in my own story. I felt like the author. When Ethan walked through the door that evening, I knew something was off. His shoulders were stiff, jaw clenched in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, not since his surgical board exam. Maybe. He tossed his keys a little too hard onto the counter and barely looked at me. I just got off the phone with Mom, he said, his voice flat but charged. I set down the book I was reading and sat up straighter. Oh, she told me, he continued, that you humiliated her, that you and your dad made her clean floors like a criminal, that it was a personal attack. I didn't speak right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed him to realize, truly realize how absurd it sounded. She also said, he added, crossing his arms, that you've been hiding your family's wealth this whole time, that you're not who you say you are. I stood slowly and walked over to the drawer by the bookshelf. I opened it, pulled out a slim folder, and handed it to him. He opened it without a word. Inside were the printed screenshots of her text uninviting me from the party, a copy of the hotel invoice, and finally, 2 photos from the kitchen. Margaret, in all her dripping, dish-scrubbing glory. He stared at them in silence, eyes scanning every detail. She said I wasn't invited, I said softly. She made that very clear. But then she showed up to my father's hotel, lied to the staff, ran up a luxury tab, and refused to pay. Dad gave her a choice. She chose the sponge. Ethan sat down slowly, the documents still in hand. She told everyone you set her up, he murmured, more to himself than to me. I lowered myself beside him. I didn't. But I also didn't protect her from the consequences she created. He looked up at me then, his expression clouded. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I held his gaze. Because you were hoping she'd change. And I didn't want to take that hope away from you. He exhaled deeply, rubbing his forehead. I feel like an idiot. You're not, I said gently. You're a son. And a good one. But being a good son shouldn't mean letting her poison everything else. Silence settled between us like dust. Then, slowly, Ethan picked up his phone. "Who are you calling?" He didn't answer, just hit the dial button and waited. "Mom," he said as soon as she answered. I couldn't hear her side, but her voice came through the speaker like a distant screech. "I don't want your lies anymore," he snapped. "I saw the receipts, the photos, the text, everything. You didn't just lie to Lily, you lied to me?" Her voice rose, defensive, shrill, something about being betrayed and set up, and how dare you take her side. "I'm not taking sides," Ethan said, his tone suddenly like steel. "I'm choosing truth, and the truth is you've been cruel, manipulative, and completely incapable of respecting the woman I love." She was yelling now. I could hear it, barely coherent through the phone, but he didn't flinch. "I'm done." "Mom," he said flatly, "no more money, no more phone calls, no more pretending. I need to protect my family, and right now, that means protecting Lily." Then he hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at the black screen for a moment, then set the phone down on the table with a quiet finality. His face was pale, but resolute. "I think I just broke up with my mother," he said. I wrapped my arms around him without saying a word, because what could I say? I knew what it cost him, but I also knew deep in my bones that something essential had shifted, that we weren't standing in the middle of the fire anymore. We had walked through it, together. Later that night, as we curled up on the couch, Ethan rested his head on my shoulder. "She's going to hate me," he whispered. "No," I said. "She'll hate herself, but she won't admit it." He gave a sad little laugh. "You really think she'll ever change? I don't know," I said honestly, "but that's not our responsibility." He pulled me closer, and I could feel his heartbeat steady against mine, for the first time in what felt like forever. I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was breathing freely, and we were finally on the same side. The view from our apartment isn't spectacular, no skyline, no lakefront glittering in the distance, just rows of sleepy trees lining the quiet street below, and the occasional glint of headlights bouncing off the rain-darkened pavement. But from our little kitchen window, everything feels illuminated. I'm 7 months pregnant now. The nursery is barely big enough for a crib and a rocking chair, but somehow it's perfect. Ethan and I painted the walls a soft sage green, hung little framed prints of woodland animals, and strung fairy lights above the window. The apartment smells like chamomile tea and the fresh laundry Ethan just folded. It's not grand, but it's home, and this home feels safe. After Ethan cut off contact with his mother, things were quiet for a while. We filled the silence with new routines: Sunday pancake breakfasts, late-night name brainstorming sessions, walks around the neighborhood with our hands tucked into each other's coats. He even started reading baby books aloud in bed, practicing silly voices for future bedtime stories. Then, last week, we got a letter. Handwritten, no return address, just a single page in Margaret's sharp, cursive handwriting. I made mistakes. I see that now. I let pride speak for me, and it spoke cruelly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to meet my grandchild someday. I miss my son. I miss the family I could have had. I'm sorry. Ethan read it twice. Then he folded it quietly and placed it in the drawer beside our bed. "She said, sorry," I whispered. "She said the words," he replied. But sorry isn't just a word. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. Just steady, clear. It was in that moment that I saw the man he had grown into, the protector, the father, the husband who had chosen us. "She's living in a small place outside Oak Lawn now," he said later. "She had to sell the penthouse." I didn't respond right away. I knew what that must have felt like for her, trading in a marble foyer and concierge service for laminate floors and coin-operated laundry. A life she once judged as beneath her was now her reality. Consequence dressed in modest curtains. But the truth is, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing, just a soft, distant ache, like watching someone choose the wrong path over and over and never learn to read the signs. "I don't think we're ready for her to be in our lives again," Ethan said quietly. "Not right now." "I agree," I replied. "But maybe someday, because that's what healing is. It's not a door you fling open. It's a door you build, brick by brick, with time and truth. And some doors stay closed until both sides are ready. Tonight, after dinner." I stood by the window with my hands resting on my growing belly. Ethan was on the couch, reading a book on infant sleep cycles, looking every bit the earnest soon-to-be dad. The lamplight warmed the room, casting a gentle glow over the framed photos on the wall. Our wedding day, our first road trip, a Polaroid from the night we found out we were expecting. It's funny, all the things Margaret thought I lacked: status, pedigree, polish, turned out to be irrelevant, because family isn't built on power. It's built on care, on hard conversations, on choosing love over pride again and again. And I've stopped hiding who I am, not just my family background, but my strength, my voice, my worth. I used to think being quiet made me safe. Now I know being honest makes me free. I looked out at the city lights in the distance, less a dazzling skyline now, more a quiet hum of life carrying on. There's a child coming into this world soon. One we'll raise with kindness, and boundaries, and laughter. One who will know that love doesn't come with conditions, and that being gentle doesn't mean being weak. Ethan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. He pressed his lips to my shoulder and whispered, "We're going to be okay." I smiled, resting my hands over his. "We already are."